You know, it's so good to see all of you again. It's hard to believe it's been 3 years since we met here. You know, it's almost been like a bad dream that you just can't wake up from. But in many ways, or in other ways, it's where has the time gone? As I get older, I find myself asking that question much more often. Now, before I get started, I want to recognize someone, Judge Nathaniel Moran. Where are you at, Nathaniel? Right here. For those of you who don't know him, he's running to replace the outgoing Congressman, Louis Gohmert, in District 1. You know, there's just a few days left before the election, and I'm sure there's a lot of places he could have been today, but he chose to spend this afternoon with this group here, and I'm very much appreciative of that. So, Nathaniel, I just want to give you a little heads up. Should you be successful in your campaign, I expect you to be somewhat of a bulwark between us and the bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. And I'll tell you, I'm going to be speaking about some of these people, and some of it won't be real favorable. But just don't forget us when you get there. Each year as I begin putting thoughts together for this meeting, I sometimes struggle coming up with a topic. This year it was easy. It's about the price we are paying for electricity, not just at Bowie-Cass, but across this country. I hope you've had a chance to carefully read my comments in the program. And if not, please do so, because they tie in with what I will be speaking about today. Now, I fully understand there may be some in attendance who may disagree with some of my assessments and opinions, but that's okay. For those who have attended in the past or know me personally, know I'm pretty much a no-nonsense guy. And I tell things like I see them, politically correct or not. My lovely wife always cautions me to avoid being so doom and gloom. But unfortunately, the topic I've settled on this year won't allow me to avoid that. It's serious business, folks, and it affects everyone who pays an electric bill each month. So here I go. Plain and simple, what we are experiencing with our electric rates are self-inflicted on this nation by the current administration's energy policy. Heavily influenced by those who worship at the altar of environmentalism and those who exploit it for greed and control. Now, these are not the only reasons, but they are the primary drivers nonetheless. One quick example is the government's premature, forced closure of low-cost, reliable coal-fired power plants decades before their useful service life have expired, leaving many, if not most, with tens of millions in stranded costs and debt to service. The owners of those plants are then left with no choice but to replace them with a politically acceptable resource, presumably renewables such as wind and solar, which nearly always increase costs and are far less reliable. It would be like the government saying you can no longer drive your gas or diesel automobile effective at the end of this year. You must park it and buy an electric vehicle, even though you may still owe years in monthly payments. You are then left with no choice but to make payments on both, even though one is sitting in the yard and essentially worthless. The end result is your total cost of transportation just went up. In the case of shutting down a power plant fired by lignite coal, like we have here in East Texas, the owner can't just simply walk away. It must be dismantled, and the mine that is servicing it must be retired, and the land then returned to its natural state, costing millions more in closing costs. In fact, our own energy supplier, Northeast Texas Electric Cooperative, is currently being forced to close one of their lowest cost resources and is in that process as I speak to you today, with another in their fleet scheduled for closure beginning in 2024. Then, in order to fulfill their capacity requirements, will then have to replace the power from those two resources. And guess who ends up paying for this? Here's another example. You may or may not be aware that natural gas is the fuel used to generate roughly 1/2 of the power from generating resources Bowie-Cass purchases. The price of natural gas has quadrupled since June of 2020, when your electric rate here at this very cooperative was the lowest it had been since 2010. Now it's higher than at any time since Bowie-Cass has existed, primarily driven by this country's insane energy policy. Again, it's not the sole reason, but certainly the primary reason. Now, they have told us what their plan is, so there really is no question. This administration has deliberately prevented America's oil, coal, and natural gas companies from operating efficiently to produce low-cost energy the way they did so recently and so well, and then blame those companies for the resulting higher energy prices. No matter what the whims of the government authoritarians, the cost of any commodity is largely determined by supply and demand, period. And that's how it should be. For any other method is arbitrary and unsustainable. Please understand that I am not so naive to think that greed isn't a part of the equation, as I have already stated. For the members here in Northeast Texas on Bowie-Cass lines, our present and most immediate concern is the cost of energy. The next challenge we may be faced with appears to be simply keeping the lights on. If you'll recall, back in 2006, there was a documentary titled An Inconvenient Truth. Al Gore made all types of wild claims of impending doom. He stated emphatically, "We only have 10 years to stop what was at that time referred to as global warming, before the oceans begin to rise and we reach the point of no return, if we hope to be able to save the planet." In many ways, that documentary led to where we are today. Discussions have now progressed on to the Green New Deal, whereby a former bartender named Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC as most people probably know her by, proclaimed several years ago, we only have 12 years before the world ends as we know it. You know, I am always amazed how politicians have mastered the art of creating a sense of urgency to pass laws and policy. I've also noticed, and I'll bet you have too, anytime politicians say we must hurry, you may as well reach for your checkbook. Remember when one of our most esteemed leaders famously said, "We have to pass the bill so we can find out what's in it"? I won't call any names here. I don't know about you, but there's just something that doesn't sit well with me when the highborn and other elites continue to buy multi-million-dollar beachfront properties and fly around the world in their private jets, lecturing all of us common folk on how we need to make sacrifices to save the planet. I was always taught if you really believe something, you lead by example. Weren't you? So now I'll tell you what an actual inconvenient truth is. Coal, natural gas, and nuclear generation are literally able to run 24/7, 365. And they have a 90 to 95% capacity factor. To think they can be replaced with intermittent wind and solar that have a 25% capacity factor, meaning they are only available 25% of the time, is simply not reality. And by the way, those are Federal Energy Regulatory Commission numbers, not mine. Folks, I want to be clear on something. I love the concept of renewables, and I truly believe it is a noble cause to systematically move in that direction, being careful not to jeopardize reliability. In fact, today, a reasonable portion of your electricity comes from those sources. The problem is when that mix gets out of balance, it inevitably leads to what is happening in California and what was the primary driver of widespread power outages experienced here in Texas, along with the astronomical spike in prices during those 5 days of Winter Storm Uri back in February of 2021. That 5-day spike in power costs is currently a part of your PCRF. We are all paying here at Bowie-Cass today. And it in fact bankrupted one of the largest G&Ts in the state. I also want to be clear on this as well. I'm not a climate change denier. I'm a realist and always have been. I actually believe the climate has been changing ever since the day Almighty God created this planet. We are so blessed to live on it. And I will not, nor will I ever apologize for believing that. The debate is to what degree humans are impacting it. And contrary to what we read and hear nonstop through mainstream media, that ongoing debate is not settled science and somewhat unlikely to ever be. I have stated from this very podium before that we all have a duty and responsibility to be good stewards of this environment. And I truly, truly believe that. I'm simply stating another inconvenient truth, which is reality. Sadly, telling the truth is becoming a lost virtue in the world we live in today. Lastly, don't think for even a second reliability and the cost of electricity isn't front and center in my mind and the minds of the other directors sitting here, along with management and every single employee here at this cooperative. We want the lights to stay on and to be able to afford our electric bill just like you and the rest of the members. Unfortunately, far too many of the politicians and bureaucrats in our nation's capital live in a fantasy world and have no idea what everyday people like you, me, and other Americans are having to deal with. Folks, that's all I've got to say today. Really appreciate you being here. Great weather. How could it be any better than right here in Northeast Texas? Thank you again.